Welcome! Today we're going to do a tall vase, or maybe a couple of vases. I'm not sure yet. We'll see. So, what is a tall vase? Well, this one is definitely a tall vase, but this was made in sections. It's a little more advanced way of throwing really tall things in it. If you're interested in that, I have a couple of videos about how you can do this. But let's assume that you're not ready to move into sectional throwing. You just want to do a normal tall vase. What is a tall vase? Well, this is also a tall vase. This is made out of one piece of clay. I think it's maybe about 40 centimeter. I would also think that this is by most people considered a tall vase, and maybe even this one. But this is definitely not a tall vase. I don't have any objective way of determining what a tall vase is. It's up to you. But I would say anything that's above 20-25 centimeter, I think most people would think is a tall vase. And I also know that most of you, if you're not that experienced at throwing it, making taller pieces is really difficult. So today I'm going to show you a few tips on how you can make your pots taller. To throw a tall vase, you of course need a decent amount of clay. The more clay, the taller potentially it can be. It all of course depends on how thin you can make the walls and how much of the clay from the bottom you can pull up through the walls. I'm not very good at throwing very thin. I admit that. I am practicing because I want to use as much of the clay as possible. But I took this, it's about, I think about a little less than 3 kilo maybe. About 3 kilo. I didn't weigh it. I just took a lump that I think would suit this exercise. Also, I will suggest that you use a clay with a decent amount of grog. That will make it more stable. And especially when we're pulling something high, it can very easily get more wobbly. And the stability of having grog clay helps. This actually have a lot of grog, but it's very fine particles, so you don't actually feel it that much. You've probably seen me use this clay before. It's a wonderful clay from Schneider in Germany. It's called 551. It's got a lot of iron in it. It's a beautiful color, and it's 40% grog, but very fine particles. So it's actually very, very nice to throw with. The other thing I will recommend that you do is, if you have the option to do that, is to throw on a bed. Because I always throw on beds because I have a wheel with bed pins, so it's very easy to use. But especially when you're throwing something tall, or if you're throwing something very wide, I think it's difficult to move it. I know lots of potters can just move it. I'm not very good with that. I like to throw it on bed. It makes it very easy to move. I have used my own beds in the past that I made, but I just got these new beds in MDF from a German company called Schneider. They do wonderful things. I also got some other tools from them. And today I'm going to test this bed. From the first look of it, it looks really good. I also got this bed system. Haven't used that before. There's several of these on the market, but the ones from Schneider, they come with 2 different inner sizes. So you can have like this size, or you can have, I'll put this inlay in, and you can have, now I have to feel with it with one hand, and you can use a small bed, which is nice when you put it for drying, so don't take up too much space, but you can still use your normal bed pins. I never used these bed systems before. I just got this. I'm definitely going to try that out. But for today, I'm just going to use the full-size bed. Just hold on a second. Because we're going to do a big lump of clay, and it's just easier. So let's go ahead with that. always, and especially when you're dealing with bigger lumps of clay, and even bigger than this, try and tap cinder it as much as possible, because then it's already half cindered when you start dealing with it. So you see, I mean, it's not perfectly cindered, but it's close enough. One of the challenges with bats is that they have to stick, the clay have to stick well enough for it not to glide off. And they also have to, in my opinion, release themselves when they dry. So far, it looks good with this bat. It's definitely sticking well. Also, you don't want a surface that is too rough, because that's going to hurt your hands. And this is very nice and smooth. So far, good experience. I'm just doing the usual coning up and down a little bit, just to align the particles and make sure that it's well structured, and there's no lumps or any air bubbles or anything. It's always a good idea to center your clay as good as possible before you start throwing. But especially if you go very high or you go very wide, it's very important that it's well centered. So if you're still struggling with centering, spend some time. It doesn't have to be fast. But it's going to be so much easier for you if it's relatively well centered. I think we're good with this one. You have to decide what size foundation of the vase you're going to do. You can squeeze it in a little bit, which we're going to do. I'll show you in a minute. But I think this is a good starting point. Also, at this point, you need to decide whether you want to trim a foot, because then you're going to leave enough clay there for the foot, or if you just want to cut it and don't have a foot. I'm going to leave just enough clay to do a small foot, not a very big one. In case you're ever in doubt about what the thickness of your bottom is, you can use a potter's needle, push it in, push your finger down, take it up, and now you can see this one is definitely a little bit too much. So we can thin it out just a little bit. The more experience you get, the less you need to use the needle tool. But I think especially with bigger lumps of clay, it can be difficult to judge it perfectly. So better to test. And as always, make sure that your button is well compressed. That will help you avoid any cracking. So now we need to bring it in again. It's just a little bit easier when you widen it out to finish the button. And as I said in the beginning, I want a little bit of a smaller base, so you can still push that in after you did your initial opening. And as you see, I always try to scrape off this slip out here and reuse it. That way I don't have to use as much water. There's always been a discussion about how much water you should use when you throw. The fact is that you can do it any way that works for you. Some potters use lots of water, some potters use less. But in general, I would say that the more water you use, the faster you need to throw. Because the water will slowly soak into the clay and make it more and more weak. So if you can throw really fast, you can use a lot of water. Some potters do that. If you are throwing a lot slower, you need to be a little more careful with how much water you use. I'm going to do the initial pulling from the inside. I kind of made a groove in there that I can grab my hands onto. And always, when I finish, just make sure that the rim is still stable and it's well compressed. One of the biggest problems I found, at least in the beginning, in throwing taller vases is to get enough of the clay down here. Right now, there's probably this much clay down here and much less up here. And we want that clay to get up in the pot. Still want the base to be a little more narrow, like this. So now we're beginning to get a decent size. I always start out, and that goes for any kind of pot that I do, almost, start out with a straight cylinder. After we get the initial height that we want out of this clay, we can start doing some shaping. And I think for this, at least this first one, we're going to do sort of a classic shape with a little bit of a rounded bottom and not a super narrow, but like a colored in neck. Now it's time to pull some of that clay from the bottom up through the base. And just take it easy, don't rush it. And see, now we got a lot more of the clay from the bottom up through the walls. So I'm gonna take out the water from the inside several times as we go, because I just don't want it to soak in too much down there, because if we do, we'll weaken the bottom too much, and we'll just make it dry so much slower than the rest of the pot. And again, just compressing the rim. So we're slowly getting there. It's still a little bit on the thick side, so I think we can pull out a little more height. Now we're beginning to get somewhere. I'm just going to color it in just a little bit and make it a little more even. Now I'm just trying to see if there's any parts of the walls that are not the same thickness. To begin with, I like my walls to be as even in thickness as possible. I do think when we get to this stage where, I can still have my arm in there, but one of the problems when you throw taller cylinders is that you end up pushing the side, what I call a lazy elbow. So you push the sides away, and it will kind of make it open too much at the top, and it will make it uneven. So to avoid that, I actually personally find that it's easier sometimes to stand up and pull. So I'm just gonna wet it a little bit, make sure that it's wet on the inside too. Yeah, because here it's still too thick. It's actually pretty good at the bottom, but here it's a little too thick. Up here it's okay. So standing up, and then I will reverse my hand, and I will use the thumb down here, and I will pull up the clay from here. This way you can also support your right arm into your body. See? I think that helped. Now let us check again. Just not pulling or anything, just feeling. It's still here. This part is still a little bit thick. It's better up here. So I think we can do one more pull. Just want to make sure that it's lubricated. The one thing you don't want is to have areas that are wet and areas that are dry, because when you get to the dry area, it kind of holds, stick your finger, and then you will pull it out of shape. And as you get closer to the top, you have to release the pressure a little bit, because otherwise you're going to push it too thin. And then release very slowly. If you release too fast, you're going to kick it out of shape. Now I just want to even out the wall a little bit, so I will use a rim. And just again, be careful. You may want to wet your arm a little bit, so you don't create any friction. And try and support your right arm to your body or your knees, or whatever feel comfortable. This is mostly just a slip. And to get this out now will help stabilize the structure of the walls, so they don't become too slippery, too wet. Now it's 33, 34 centimeter high. When you start expanding the lower part of it, it will drop in height. But when you color in the top, you'll get thicker walls and you can expand it. So how big it's going to turn out is depends on the shape, really. But we have a decent starting point here, I think. I think we're getting to the height where we can agree this is a tall vase. Well, it's not a very interesting vase yet, but it's definitely tall. On the tallish side, at least. So now I just want to make sure that it's not too greasy. We want to get some of the slip off again. We don't want to weaken the walls too much. So that doesn't have to look perfect yet, but need it to be well centered, and the rim to be well compressed and even. And I think it is now. So now we're ready to do some shaping. And as I said, I want this to have a bit of a round body, and then go into a not a super tight or slim neck, but still, colored in a little bit. So doing this, you should go slowly. The clay don't like to be abused or pushed too much at a time. You can easily push it out of shape if you do that. To avoid that that it shrinks too much or you lose too much height, you can still kind of squeeze the clay as you go. So now we're beginning to get a bit of body on the shape. Still gonna leave it in the top. If you want a narrow or narrow-ish top on your vase, you have to be careful that it doesn't flare out at this point, because as you probably know already, it's easier to open it up than it is to narrow it in. When you work on the shape, and especially when you work on larger pots, it can be a good idea to move away a little bit. I have a mirror. I don't have a mirror here. I should. It's actually a good aid. But when you're working on it, instead of looking here, where most would focus their eyes, you should actually focus on the edge here, because that's where you can see the shape. So how wide you should make it depends on, of course, what you want, but also the more narrow the neck is, the wider the body is going to seem. So it's a proportional issue. I think I'm about the size that I want now. And as you can probably see, we already lost some height. But that comes, with the territory, so to speak. When you expand it, you're going to lose some height. We can bring some of that back when we start to do the neck. I just want to finish this lower part, and for that, I'm just going to use a rib, to just perfect this shape. So again, this is mostly slip. So now I like this part of it. I will trim in the foot a little bit more in the final stage, but it's nice to have that extra clay there. It's actually not very thick, but it helps create some stability. So now I'm going to work a little more on the upper part. I'm trying not to add too much water on the inside. So I will narrow in the neck a little bit. There are different techniques for that. Some use like a 6-point narrow. I'm more using this choking, and it requires that you have some speed, that it's lubricated, and that you don't do it too slow. So and then by using my fingers on the inside, I avoid to some degree that the neck becomes too wobbly. It will very often do that. But we can, in the end, we can cut it clean. I'll show you, because we probably need it. And now, because we made it more slim, we also had thicker walls, so we can get some of that height back that we lost in the expansion of the body. I think we need a little more of a shoulder. Again, now it becomes an issue of what design you want to make. And for this exercise, it may not actually be that important, but for the aesthetics of this vase, I do want to have a little more shoulder. That's the upper part just before the neck. I think that looks better. Yeah, I think that looks better. Maybe I should take the camera just a little bit down, or maybe not. No, I think I'm gonna leave it here. Is it okay? Of course you can't answer, but I hope it is. And again, taking out the water. I'm gonna try and narrow in the neck a little bit more. I always have this discussion with my female friends. I like, for aesthetic reasons, I like vases with a very narrow neck. But then they're like, we can't have that many flowers in it, and we want more flowers. And I'm like, yeah, but that's also more expensive. So I do make narrow neck vases from an aesthetic point of view, but it's also a lot cheaper, because you just need one flower. For this, you need a bunch of flowers. So it is definitely more expensive, but That's a discussion you're going to take with whoever you care about. And as you see now that we narrowed in the neck, the top is now not completely even flat. I want it to be that. So I'll just try and even it out as much as possible. And then I will use a potter's nail and just keep my hand very steady and then just cut off the top. So now the top is completely even. I'm gonna use this spongy thing from mud tools. It's very fine particle. It's nice to just smooth the surface. It doesn't actually soak up that much water, but it does a great job at smoothing the surface. It just makes it look nice. And as a final touch, I'm going to use a little bit of, I'm not even sure what material it is, but you can also use chamois, leather, plastic, some people use, but just to smoothen the roundness of your neck. So I think we have a vase. Let's see how tall it got. Well, it got to 25 centimeters. So it's not a super tall vase. Could probably have made it taller. But I'll still call this a tall vase. Maybe we should do another one. It does look sexy, doesn't it? It didn't end up quite as tall as I was hoping for, which just shows that it's difficult, even for me. But it is taller than the other one, so about 32, 33 centimeter. It's difficult to see from that angle, but it is still what I would consider a tall vase. Now the two vases are done. They are even bisque-fired, which makes it a little safer to handle. Because please keep in mind, when your pot is in greenware state, that is when you just thrown it and it's dry, it's almost like a biscuit. It's so fragile. I mean, just the slightest touch and it chips off. You don't want to do that. Now when it's bisque-fired, it becomes like a rock. And of course, you can still break it, but it's a lot more solid. These are the two ones that I made this time. I don't know if you want to label it as a tall vase. I mean, it's definitely taller than this little one, but it's not, of course, as tall as this one. But this one is made in sections. I'm not good enough to throw a tall vase like this in one piece. So I like to do it in sections. And I do have some videos about how I do sectional throwing. But still, I hope you get the point. This one I applied terra sigillata to. It's still the red clay, but I applied this white terra sigillata because I'm going to use it in a pit fire or maybe in a ragu, but I think it's going to be in a pit fire. This one ended up do some crazy texturing and pushing in the clay here and there because when I was trimming it. To be honest, I made a mistake and pushed my finger somewhere, and then I decided, well, let's make a design out of it. I'm not sure how much I like it, but again, I hope you get the point. I hope you learned a little bit about throwing big. The thing is, if you want these round button things, it needs to be very tall to begin with, because when you start to expanding it, it will drop. And as you saw with these ones, they were probably almost 10 centimeters higher before I started shaping them. Anyway, I still hope you learned something from this video, and if you did, please subscribe and share, comment if you have some good comments or bad comments. Everything is welcome, as long as you keep a good tone. I will have a new video, a detailed video, next Sunday. I usually premiere the videos about 5 p.m. Central European Time, and I hope to see you soon again.